Welcome to another video from McFatter Tech Musser. If you like these videos, please click subscribe.
It's mid-afternoon. This is a continuation from our first part on developing our network project. And you'll recall that at the end of the first part, we had created all our virtual infrastructure. I had built my two routers. My router 1, which does NAT, it could get to the internet just fine. We had established we could ping across our WAN connection to router 2. Router 2 could ping router 1. The gateway interfaces on both were reachable. But router 2 could not get to the internet. It couldn't get out to the NAT interface. And as soon as I ended the recording, I realized, you know what, I could have fixed this before we ended the recording. I said we were going to take a look at this. Well, if you take a look at the screen, you can see that on router 2, I can ping subnet 1's gateway. That's 192.168.1.1. That means I can traverse across my WAN link to my router 1. I can reach that interface. But if I ping Google DNS 8.8.8.8, I get a general transmit failure. Something's wrong. Well, if you look over here on the routing table on router 1, there is our subnets. We can see our WAN link. We've got all that information. But take a look. It's got our default route. The 0.0.0.0 subnet mask 0.0.0.0. And where does it go? And that's the answer is, hey, if I don't have an entry in my routing table, use that. And that allows it to get to the internet. Over here on router 2, if I look in my routing table, it doesn't exist. I need to create that default route. For if I don't have a defined route, do this. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to static routes. I'm going to right click. I'm going to say new static route. And if I don't know what's here, go across my WAN link. So I'm going to select the WAN link. My destination is 0.0.0.0. My net mask is 0.0.0.0.0. My gateway, what's on the other end? What's the gateway? It's 10.1.1.1. And my metric, if I look over, I can see that on the router 1, that default route has a metric of 25. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to set it to that same thing over here and click OK. Now if I look at my routing table, there's my default route. If I come over here and I just press my up arrow to repeat my last command, there it works. That's all it took. My routing is done. I'm going to start building my domain controllers because we're done with this. That's our second part, is going to be building our domain controllers. In fact, I can take these off my screen. I'm going to open up my Hyper-V Manager. I'm going to connect to my Final DC, get that started. We'll move that over here while that fires up. I'm going to go ahead and get my DC2 started up. Now, these will be easy. How many network adapters? I just have one. All I need to do is define the network connection, the static IP and the host name, and I'll be ready to build my network. Okay, remember, everything else is done. DC2, it's starting up. DC1, it's already doing the get ready. This should only take just a few more minutes, and they're going to reboot. I'll be ready to log in and start configuration. So while I'm doing that, I'm going to review my settings. I got my paperwork right here, got everything right here, and I can see that I know that my subnet 1, that's on that 192.168.1.0 network with a Class C subnet mask. And subnet number 2 is 192.168.2. That's my network ID, and it's a Class C, so My gateways are both end with .1, so 1.1 and 2.1. Well, my domain controllers, I'm going to use the same IP kind of configuration. It's going to be 192.168.1.2 and 192.168.2.2. Uniform naming. We're going to click Next. We'll accept. We'll set our default password that we're using. Go ahead and let that start up. I'm going to do the same thing over here. I just love these differencing disks. It makes it so much better. Okay, I'm going to leave DC2 set there. We're going to focus on DC1 for now. We're going to go ahead and we're going to get logged in. Remember, we're logging in with local credentials. If I bring a member server in, if I get my domain will be all up and going. Remember, my domain name was going to be project.local. That's what it will be. Bring a member server on. When you go to log on to that member server, if I try to log on as administrator, it's going to switch me back to trying to log on as the local administrator. Here again, another reason why we disable that domain administrator account. We create a different account, a different name, something that Joe Hacker is not going to be able to figure out real easy. Everybody knows administrator. It's in every Windows system, right? Don't let them use it. I'm going to switch over to local server. I'm only going to see my one adapter. That's all I've got to worry about. This is my final DC1. I'm going to go ahead and click on my network connections. I'm going to right click, go to properties, double click Internet Protocol version 4, and I'm going to define that. I already said it, 192.168.1.2. Default Class C address. I'm going to give it my gateway address so we can get to the internet when necessary, 1.1. Now, this is going to be our Active Directory, directory services. This is going to be our domain controller. It's also going to be our DNS server. So, if I've got a question about DNS, who am I going to ask? I'm going to ask myself. I'm going to put the local loop back in for my DNS server. I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to click OK. One more time. Yes. Let's go ahead, let's make sure we've got connectivity. See if we do. I'm just going to go straight away and ping 8.8.8.8. It works. I can't resolve that name. Guarantee you that. If I try to do a -A, my computer doesn't know about DNS yet. It will. I want to rename it, so I'm going to click on, I can click work group or computer name. Takes me to the same place. And I'm going to set it to that final DC1. Go ahead and click OK. It's going to prompt me, hey, you need to restart to apply these changes. I'm just going to hit tab and press enter one more time. Do I want to restart now? You bet I do. Go ahead. While that's going on, while that's restarting, I'm going to jump over to my DC2, get that IP configured and host name done. Yeah, I was going to say, I think I typed it wrong there. I had to fat fingered it. Do that. Big hands. While that's coming up, I'm going to go ahead and get logged back in here. Because since I've got my host name done, I've got my static IP address, I'm going to go ahead and start installing the role. Why not? See, Server Manager coming up over here. Take a little bit longer than I thought it would. Let's see what's going on memory-wise. They're playing nicely. As soon as Server Manager's done loading, we can do our manage, add, roles, and features. Take a look over here. That's up and running. Coming up. We're good over here. I went back to DC1. And as we go through these videos, you're going to hear me just refer to them as DC1 or DHCP. I'm not going to do final DC1 every time. That's just redundancy. Add roles and features. Everything we do on these labs is going to be role or feature based. So as long as I don't check off skip this page by default, I can hit next 3 times, because right now I'm only going to be managing the individual servers. So next, next, next. We're going to select Active Directory Domain Services. We are going to add the administrative tools. We want to be able to manage this, so I'm going to add features. I'm also going to go ahead and check DNS Server right now. It's going to get installed when I'm doing this anyhow, but we'll do it. Next, next. We're going to roll through. We can see an explanation of what we're going to be installing, and install. Remember, this only installs the role or roles. It doesn't configure them. We still need to configure everything when we're done. While that's going on, I'm going to jump over to DC2. We're going to go to our network connection. We're going to set our static IP address. If you'll remember, this is 192.168.2.2 default gateway, or default subnet mask. Our gateway over here is 192.168.2.1. Preferred DNS. We're going to be joining this to our domain once we have our domain, right? So for DNS, even though it doesn't exist yet, I'm going to point to 192.168.1.2. I'm going to click OK. And OK. Say yes. I'm going to close this. I'm going to go ahead and click to rename it. I'm going to click change. I'm going to set my final DC2. Click OK. I could wait until this was joined, until my domain was up and running, but you know what, I'm just going to go ahead and do this for now. So we'll go ahead and let it restart. Over here I can see that my installation has completed. I'm going to promote this to a domain controller. This is your first domain controller in your first domain. So it is the first domain controller in the first domain of the first forest. So you can't have a forest without trees. So I'm going to create a new forest. I'm going to add a new forest. My root domain name is going to be project.local. Click next. Checks, make sure there's no conflicts. As soon as that moves forward, we'll be able to see a couple more options that we'll talk about here in a moment. While that's doing that, I'm going to go back over here and get logged in. Server manager should come back up here. Yep, there it comes. Okay, over here, still thinking, wheels are still turning, gears are still churning. Under the Directory Services Restore mode, this is a way to get into a restore options. You can see now it's loaded. We have an asterisk indicating that we need to set a password. Here again, if this is a production machine, we're not going to use the same password. For this, we will just keep some uniform passwords just in case. Keep it simple. This is all about learning. But we can see that this is going to install DNS, and it's also going to be a GC, a global catalog. Got to have at least one global catalog in every site. Because that's the other thing we're going to be doing. We're going to be doing sites and services. We've got 2 different locations. So we're going to have 2 different sites as well, 2 different subnets. We're going to be able to do replication through a bridgehead server. We're going to click next. There is no DNS yet. Click next. It's going to verify our NetBIOS name of project. Shouldn't take too long. A few moments. There again, just depends on your disk speed. There's project. We're going to click next. Paths. This is important. Were this to be a production domain controller, I'd probably want some secondary storage where I'm going to put my databases, my log folders, my sysfile folder, offloaded from the operating system. Let that operating system do what it does. offload all the database rights, all that stuff, maybe to another storage media. We're going to just leave it where it is for now. We can see what we're going to be doing. If I click next, it's going to check the prerequisites, make sure they all meet. We should get a green check. Should be good to go. Just takes a few moments for it to check. Remember, patience, perseverance. Sometimes things take longer than you think. We have to have perseverance. We need to have patience. Let it continue. Let it do what it needs to do. Find your happy spot, right? Sometimes this can get frustrating, right? Pulling your hair out. Well, what hair you've got left, you're pulling out because things aren't working right. Well, step back, decompress, take your time, work through it. Okay, all prerequisite checks passed successfully. Click Install to begin. Here we go. Now it's going to start building our partitions. It's going to install those Active Directory objects. It's going to install DNS. It's going to configure our forward lookup zone for our Active Directory. When this is done, the only thing we should have to do is configure a reverse lookup. Remember, you want to be able to not only take an IP address and resolve a host name, host name to IP address, and vice versa. This is especially critical if it's an email server. Email servers on the internet, you don't have a reverse lookup listed, you're not going to be getting any email. Anybody can say they're google.com, but does the IP match? Checking, it's installing the group policy management console. Group policies, oh, I love group policies. I could spend all day just doing group policies. There's so much you can do, so many ways that we can control experience and permissions and everything that goes on in our network with group policies. It's configuring the DNS servers, and there we are. It's going to automatically sign out. It's going to automatically restart. I'm not touching anything. I'm just going to kick back. I'm going to let it do its thing. Why not? There it goes. Now this is going to take a little bit longer to start up because it's the first time it's started up as a domain controller, right? So here again, we've got to have patience. While that's going on, you know what? Since it takes a little time, it's going to sit here. It's going to wait for these different services to load. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to pause the video for a few moments. I'll be right back with you. Okay, took about 6-7 minutes for us to actually get up and running, but here we are. So we're going to go ahead and we're going to get logged in as administrator using our same password. Remember, when you promote your first server to a domain controller in your first domain, it takes those local credentials and applies them. This is another reason why we need to change those accounts up, because that local administrator account doesn't just become the domain administrator, it becomes the enterprise administrator. That means it just doesn't have the keys to the castle, it's got the keys to the whole kingdom. It needs to be secured, right? Okay, so got a couple little services not working right. That's no big deal. Right there, we've got our sites and services. We've got our ADUC, Active Directory Users and Computers. We've got our group policy management. We got DNS. That's the next thing I'm going to do. I'm going to go ahead. I'm going to go in DNS. I'm going to select my domain controller. I'm going to expand it. If I look here, I can see there's my the only member of my domain so far, right? We're going to create some reverse lookup zones. Remember, we've got 2 subnets. We're going to do right-click and do a new zone. Next, it's going to be primary zone. We want it to be writable, to be updated to all of our DNS servers in our domain. It's going to be an IPv4, and that network ID. Again, it's a full class C. So what's our network ID? 192.168.1. Allow only secure dynamic updates. We only want secure updates. Integrate with our Active Directory. Next, and finish. Rinse and repeat. If you look, there's our zone. I'm going to right click, I'm going to make another one for, yep, you guessed it, my other subnet, 192.168.2. So next, 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 tab 192.168.2. You don't have to do these through graphic, we don't. I'm just doing it so it's illustrated and easy. There's our two reverse lookup zones. I'm going to go back to my project.local forward lookup zone. I'm going to double click on my domain controller. I'm going to say update associated pointer record. That's what goes in the reverse lookup zones pointers. In our forward lookup zones is A records. Remember from your learning, what's the difference between an A record and a quad A or an AAAA record? Well, an IPv4 address is how many bits long? 4 8-bit octets. It's 32 bits. How many bits, not hexadecimal, how many bits make up an IPv6? Yeah, that's right. You remember, 128. Well, what's 32 times 128? Or, I'm sorry, what's 128 divided by 32? I got my math mixed up here. 4. So an A record is an IPv4 record. A quad A is an IPv6. If I come back over here, there's my pointer. They'll automatically be getting created for me. I'm going to close DNS. I'm coming over here to DC2, going to local server, and I'm going to join this to the domain before I do anything else to it. I want it to be a full member. So I'm going to click on workgroup. I'm going to click change. I'm going to click domain. What's my domain? It's project.local. Who can join? Administrator. And I put my password in. Yep, welcome to the domain. Hit tab, hit close, restart now. While that's restarting, I'm coming back over to DC1 because remember I said we're not going to be using that administrator account much, if all. I'm going to go to Tools, Active Directory Users and Computers. ADUC. I'm going to expand my domain. I'm going to select users. When you copy a user account, you copy the permissions associated with the account. That's all. I'm going to right-click Administrator. I'm going to say Copy. And to keep it simple, I'm going to name my copied administrator account. I'm going to call it System Admin. So first name System, last name Admin. Now I wouldn't do this in production. It'd be some weird string, but for my user logon name, I'm going to do a contraction of that. First initial, last name, right? Sysadmin, sysadmin. Sadmin, I think that's catchier. There we go. We're going to use our same password that we use in our test environment. Here again, if this is production, you want a complex long password. Remember, complexity defeats the human element, length defeats the computer. Length is stronger than complexity. And since this is our production environment, you know what, this is only going to be up for a short term, but I'm going to say password expires. Just maybe like as if this was going to be a service account that I was going to create to run a service, and then I was going to deny the ability for it to be locally logged on. Finish. Okay, there's my system administrator. If I log off of this and log back on as system admin, I could disable the administrator account. That's not where I'm at right now. I'm going to come back over here. See it? It says sign into project. Notice that right down there. It says sign in to project, the name of my domain. If I type in administrator, if I type it correctly, administrator, look what happened to the sign in. It switched to final DC2. Now there's ways around that. I could say at project.local. I could turn around and I could say project/administrator. But you know what? It's easier just to do this. Use that copied account. Totally circumvents all those other issues. Password, we're in. System admin. Our DC2 is going to come up here. We should have full replication already. At this point, I could build sites and services. I can define my subnets. I can define who's going to be the bridgehead server in each site. I'll have full replication between my sites. I do anyhow, but it's a good idea to define those boundaries. If I go into tools, it's not. I haven't promoted this yet. We got to go. So this is a logged into our domain. It's a member of our domain. If we come back over here in computers, see it's listed as a computer, not as a domain controller. Haven't promoted it yet. We're going to do that now. Manage, add roles and features. How many times do I click? Yeah, 3 times. 1, 2, 3. We're going to Active Directory, domain services, add those administrative tools. I'm going to do DNS at the same time. Don't have to, it'll do it. Just a habit that I got into a long time ago. Next, 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 install. Now, once this installation is done, remember there was a couple choices there, and when we created our project.local domain, I told it that I wanted to add a new forest. Well, our first sapling, our first tree in the forest is growing. I'm not going to select add a new forest this next time when I promote this to be a domain controller. I'm going to add a domain controller to an existing. We're going to see that here in just a few minutes. While that's going on, I'm going to save myself some time. Coming back over here to DC1, and I'm going to open up Tools, Sites and Services. It'll be open up here in just a moment. Oh, by the way, while that's doing, I'm going to pin Active Directory users and computers to my taskbar. I'm going to pin Sites and Services also. And we don't have to go up to Tools. Save myself some clicks. Save myself some steps. I'm going to expand Sites. And I'm going to select subnets. There's nothing there yet. I want to define the subnets that we have. So here again, 192.168.1.0/ yep, you got it, 24. And for now, we're just going to apply it to our default first site. And I'm going to make another one, new subnet. And I'm going to do the same thing, 192.168.2.0/24. Attach it to our first site. So right now, this just has my one domain controller in it. That works. Yeah, it does. Over here, we're going to promote this. This is those choices I was talking about. We're not going to create another new forest. That would create a second domain. We don't want to do that. We want to add a domain controller to an existing domain, that first option. You'll see it already saw my project.local domain. And it sees my current credentials are valid. We're going to just simply click Next. This is in a separate site, so I want to have a global catalog here as well. So both of those first options are going to remain checked. Here in a few moments, we'll see our little red asterisks beside password. There they are. We've got to put in our directory services restore mode password. Click Next. Go ahead. Hey, nah, you can't check it. Nah. Don't worry about it. Click Next. Replicate from any domain controller. Or I could specify replicate from Final DC1. Sure, why not? Next. 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 Do my prerequisites. Can I verify connections? It's checking, making sure I can connect now too. Because remember, it's going to pull a copy of my Active Directory from Final DC1 to over to here. These are going to be the same. They're going to be like mirror images of each other. Prereqs are all good. Install. So now this is going to go through the same process, but see it says domain upgrade status. It's looking at some different things. Instead of creating it, maybe copying. Different things. Different processes, similar, but different. Now, see there it said replicating. It wasn't creating, it was replicating. That's what domain controllers do. They replicate change. Configuring our DNS. Before we know it, this thing's going to be ready to restart. There. Configure it as a domain controller. It's going to restart automatically. I'm going to come back over here to my DC1. In my users and computers, I'm going to refresh this. You can see it no longer is listed as a computer. So over here, it's now listed as a domain controller. And you can see that DC type GC, not every server, not every domain controller has to have a copy of that global catalog, but you got to have at least one per site. Back over here on our sites and services, if I refresh this, if I come to sites, we'll refresh the whole thing. Servers, there's my 2 servers. Now before I start manipulating things here, I'm going to let this thing fully start up. But what we're going to do is we're going to rename the default first site name. That's what the first site is always named. And we'll call it, I'm just going to call it subnet 1. In fact, I'm going to do that now. So I'm going to rename, we're going to call it subnet 1. There we are. Sites, I'm going to right click, I'm going to say new site. What I'm going to call it, I'm going to call it subnet 2. Oop, not 32, 2. There goes those fingers again of mine. Ensure that subnet 2 is linked to other sites with site links. We have to make a site link. And add domain controllers. Make sure you install 1 or more domain controllers. You need to have a domain controller. Connect it, list the subnet for it. Click OK. I'm going to go into my subnet listings. I'm going to right click on my subnet 2 IP range and go to properties, and I'm going to select subnet 2 for it. That's going to assign it to subnet 2. We can see that now. Subnet 1, subnet 2. I'm going to expand my servers. Final DC2. I'm going to move to subnet 2. I'm going to click OK. There it is. Inter-site transports. This is how that replication takes place. If you've got a very, 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 very slow link, you might use Simple Mail Transport Protocol, SMTP. For all practical purposes, we're always going to use IP. So if I look at my default site link, if I right-click and go to Properties, I can see my 2 sites are already contained in it. I've only got the 2 sites, so I'm just going to walk away from it at this point. It's just fine the way it is. Our sites and services are configured. I can go in here. If I look here, there's not much going on yet. They're automatically generated. We're going to start seeing some things take place here. Automatically generated, so I could right click, I could say replicate now, get those changes going. I'm going to come back over here. We're going to sign as sadmin, our password. fact, over here, I'm going to say replicate now. Ooh, it's in the context of being that the changes are still taking place. See, I probably should have waited. I was impatient. Let's take a look here. Tools, users and computers. Remember what was I talking about just like 10 minutes ago? Patience. Let's expand this out. Nope, not computers. There's our two domain controllers. There's my system administrator. That's all good. Let's see what we've got under sites and services. Here again, remember, it takes a few moments for that to load. There it comes up. I'll select sites. We're going to expand subnets. There's my two subnets. There's subnet 1, subnet 2. Final DC, final DC. Yeah, it's looking more like it. So now, because I got impatient and I didn't wait, you'll notice that there's an automatically generated connection from DC2 to DC1. I don't have one over here, so I'm going to tell it to create a new connection. And I want a connection to DC1. So I'm going to click OK. OK. There we go. There's my connection from DC2. There's my connection from DC1. Let's see if I can replicate. There we go. Okay, it's giving me a warning saying, hey, it might take a little bit of time because these are across different sites. If I have more than one domain controller in a site, let's say we're talking about enterprise grade stuff. Let's say I've got 14 domain controllers in one site. One of those is going to be designated a bridgehead server. What you want to do is that allows that to be where all your changes replicate across your sites. So you don't have 14 domain controllers all trying to send information out at the same time. Keep it organized. Okay, our sites and services are done. If I look in DNS, I should see the same thing I've got over on DC1. There's my forward lookup zones. There's my two DCs. If I expand reverse lookups, there they are. So just the same way as Active Directory, excuse me, been a long day, a lot of lecturing. Just the same way as Active Directory gets replicated across our domain controllers from one to another, our DNS does as well. If DNS gets updated on one, the others are going to get updated. So we always have the same information everywhere. It's very important. Our domain controllers are set up. Our routers are set up. We can resolve DNS within our domain, but we can't resolve a host name outside. That's going to be at the beginning of our next video in part 3. So at that point, we're going to finish the rest of our configuration up here for our DNS, and we'll also start configuring our file servers that are going to be hosting distributed file service, DFS. We're also going to build our DHCP server. Stay tuned, and I'll see you in part 3. Take care, everybody.